Lindsay Wagner did not become famous by accident. She became famous because she represented something television rarely allowed women to be in the 1970s: strong without cruelty, intelligent without arrogance, and emotional without weakness. When audiences first met her as Jaime Sommers, they saw a woman rebuilt by science, faster, stronger, almost unbreakable. The irony is that while the character looked indestructible, the woman playing her was quietly carrying fractures the camera never showed. Before the fame, before the slow-motion runs and iconic theme music, Lindsay Wagner's life was already shaped by struggle. She was born in 1949 in Los Angeles, but stability was never guaranteed. Her parents divorced when she was young, and that early fracture created a sense of self-reliance that would define much of her adulthood. From an early age, she learned that calmness could be a survival skill. If you stayed composed, people assumed you were fine. And if people assumed you were fine, they asked fewer questions. Before we continue, take 1 second to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss more real stories like this. School was not easy for her. Wagner struggled with dyslexia at a time when learning differences were barely understood, let alone supported. Teachers often mistook confusion for carelessness. Words moved differently on the page, refusing to line up the way they did for everyone else. Instead of receiving help, she learned to compensate. Memorization replaced reading. Listening replaced note-taking. She adapted quietly, developing an internal discipline that would later make her appear effortlessly professional, when in reality, every success required double the effort. Modeling came first, then acting classes, then auditions that led nowhere. Hollywood did not rush to open its doors. She took small roles, commercials, background appearances, each one a test of patience. During this period, Wagner married young, hoping for emotional stability while her career remained uncertain. But the industry does not move at the pace of personal life. When opportunities finally came, they came aggressively. Her breakthrough arrived through The $6 Million Man, where she was introduced as Jaime Sommers. The character was meant to be temporary, but audiences responded immediately. Jaime was different. She was not a sidekick or decoration. She was a presence. Viewers saw themselves in her vulnerability and admired her resilience. The response was so strong that the character spun off into her own series, The Bionic Woman. Overnight, Lindsay Wagner became a household name, but fame did not arrive gently. Production schedules were brutal. Long shooting days, physically demanding stunts, and constant travel became the norm. Wires and harnesses cut into her body as she performed scenes designed to look effortless. The show demanded precision. One misstep could mean injury, and sometimes injury came anyway. During this time, Wagner was involved in a serious car accident that left lasting physical and emotional scars. The public never knew the extent of it. On screen, she remained composed, strong, flawless. Off-screen, her body was reminding her that it was not bionic. Pain became something to manage privately. Rest became a luxury she rarely allowed herself. Hollywood reinforced the illusion. Interviews focused on her grace, her beauty, her calm demeanor. No one asked how exhaustion felt when it became chronic. No one asked how pressure affected her relationships. The image was too valuable to disrupt. Behind the scenes, her personal life began to strain. Relationships suffered under the weight of constant absence and emotional depletion. Being present for others became difficult when so much energy was spent simply staying functional. Motherhood later brought meaning, but also intensified the internal conflict between public expectation and private need. Then came the moment that would quietly reshape her entire perspective on control and fate. At one point during her career, Lindsay nearly boarded a flight she later canceled. It seemed insignificant at the time, just another scheduling change in a life full of them. Days later, she learned that the plane had crashed. There were no survivors. There was no dramatic announcement, no press conference, just the silent realization that life could end without warning, without symbolism, without meaning attached to fame or discipline or professionalism. For someone who had spent years playing a woman rebuilt after destruction, this moment landed differently. Survival suddenly felt less like strength and more like responsibility. From that point on, something shifted. She began questioning the pace of her life, the constant movement, the expectation to always say yes. She started choosing fewer roles, traveling less, and turning inward, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Strength, she realized, was not always about endurance. Sometimes it was about refusal. Wagner moved into teaching, writing, and healing work, spaces where fame held no currency, rooms where she was not Jaime Sommers, rooms where listening mattered more than being seen. These choices confused Hollywood, but they saved her. By the time the public noticed her absence, she had already rebuilt herself in a quieter way, without cameras, without applause, without slow-motion runs. The double life she lived was never about deception. It was about survival in an industry that rewards silence and punishes vulnerability. And this was only the beginning of the truth. By the time Lindsay Wagner reached her later years, she was no longer interested in being misunderstood or correcting the misunderstanding. The world still remembered her as the woman who ran in slow motion, who never seemed shaken, who always landed on her feet. But the truth was quieter and far more human. Her real strength was never in what she endured, it was in what she chose to leave behind. As Hollywood continued evolving, Wagner watched from a distance. She saw how the industry treated aging actresses, how relevance became conditional, and how value was measured by visibility rather than wisdom. Instead of fighting that system, she stepped outside of it entirely. She no longer needed to prove anything. Her career had already spoken. Now her life needed space to breathe. Public appearances became intentional rather than obligatory. When she spoke thoughtfully. When she accepted roles, they reflected her values instead of nostalgia. She was not interested in reliving Jaime Sommers for comfort or applause. She understood that living in the past is another kind of erasure, one that replaces growth with repetition. In interviews, Wagner began acknowledging realities she once kept private. She spoke openly about dyslexia, about pressure, about how fame can quietly distort self-perception, not as confession, but as clarity. Her honesty resonated deeply with people who had grown up watching her. Many realized for the first time that what they admired most about her was not her perfection, but her restraint. She also continued her work in healing and education, facilitating workshops, mentoring, and supporting others through self-awareness practices. These environments had no hierarchy, no spotlight, no demand to perform. In these spaces, her experience mattered more than her celebrity, and that mattered to her. The near-miss flight from earlier in her life remained a defining internal marker. It was not something she dramatized publicly, but it stayed with her as a reminder that survival is not earned, it is granted. That realization reshaped how she approached time. She stopped treating rest as reward and began treating it as necessity. Her later relationships reflected this evolution. Emotional honesty replaced endurance, boundaries replaced obligation. She no longer believed that love required sacrifice of self. That lesson, learned slowly and painfully, became one of her greatest personal victories. The public, meanwhile, continued asking the same question: what happened to Lindsay Wagner? The answer was simple and uncomfortable for a culture addicted to spectacle. She chose herself. She chose health over output, meaning over momentum, depth over visibility. And in doing so, she exposed a truth many celebrities never articulate. Sometimes the bravest act is not continuing, but stopping. Her double life was never about secrets, it was about contrast. The contrast between what the world demanded and what she needed, between the image that paid her bills and the inner life that saved her sanity. For 30 years, those two realities coexisted until one finally took priority. Today, Lindsay Wagner stands as something rare in Hollywood history, a woman who exited the machine without being destroyed by it. She did not burn out, she did not implode, she simply stepped away and redefined success on her own terms. And that may be her most powerful legacy of all. Not the strength to endure endlessly, but the wisdom to stop before endurance becomes self-erasure.